Health is everything, and without it, you don't have anything at all. Not only as a human, but as we heard this morning, as a company. It's clear to everyone, I've heard this over and over today, that inequitable access to healthcare has become crystal clear. Certainly, this has been on my mind. I'm thrilled to be here today with my friend and colleague, Carson Elrod, who's a Broadway actor, but also the founder of Arts Workers United, and we were sort of uniquely impacted by lack of access to healthcare across the last 2 years, and he spent a good amount of his time advocating to make sure everyone had their health. So I'm thrilled to introduce this conversation about health being a key ESG driver and significant output. Trey and I were chatting about a functional ESG program advancing our health and well-being across the board. So how do companies look at their role and place in the community, as well as their responsibility to build ecosystems of success? To answer that question, I'm thrilled to introduce, in a different capacity, my co-host today, Trey Watkins, Executive Vice President for Global Health and Corporate Responsibility at GCI Health. Carmen Villar, Vice President of Social Business Innovation at Merck. Joan Steinberg, President of Morgan Stanley Foundation and CEO of the Morgan Stanley Alliance for Children's Mental Health's Advisory Board. And facilitating this session, from the 3BL Media family, Brian Letts, Vice President of ESG Programs, 3BL Media. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Sounds like I had a fan club in the back. Good afternoon. My name, as you just heard, is Brian Letts. I am the Vice President of ESG Programs at 3BL Media, and I am so glad to be here today for what is promising to be another insightful and wonderful conversation here. As you've all heard, stakeholders of all walks are really kind of rethinking their positions and their perspectives around all sorts of issues, whether it's ESG, as a concept, or the climate crisis, leadership, work-life balance, as well as a corporate perspective and role in all of the above. So I don't know about all of you. I am similar to those stakeholder groups because my perspective has shifted, and perhaps in no way more profoundly than my perspective on health over the last few years, and how it is really the foundation for our entire lives, whether professional or personal, in fact, both. So with that, I'd like to start by asking our panel here, how has your conception of health shifted over the last 2.5 years because of our shared experience of the pandemic? And we'll start with Carmen.
Sure. Well, I want to say thanks to 3BL for having me here today. And it's great to be with my esteemed colleagues up here talking about a variety of different kinds of health, which I think is one of the important aha moments that we had from the last few years in our experience, is that it's not just about our physical health and how we're feeling or what the doctor sees on our skin or what that cough might be, but also how the community is doing and what the mental health status is of the people who live and work right next to us. So I'm excited to hear more from my colleagues about some of those things. I think as a company at Merck, one thing that we learned is, even though we have been committed since we're doing the H thing, 130 years to bring innovative healthcare products to market, what we realized was that wasn't enough. That using our R&D and our innovation to bring those things forward for the use of people around the world, there needed to be more in addition to that. We needed to think about what the healthcare ecosystems look like. We needed to think about this light that was being shown on social determinants of health. Luckily, we had already in the works been putting together an expert team around health equity. And so they have been able to advance a framework of work and priorities that help people in the commercial side of our business really think more about how they can reach those that have traditionally been the hardest to reach. And I'll just say one more thing about this, which is Jeffrey was just up here talking about C-Note. One thing we also did was to look at our investments. I mean, I run the Merck Foundation as well as part of my remit, and we've been investing the endowment over years in a way that any big company would. And I finally looked at the numbers and I said, why aren't we investing in that responsible ESG kind of way, these dollars in our endowment? And one of the investments was C-Note. So we revamped with Treasury and Finance our entire way of thinking, not just about giving away the grants, but about what we were doing with the investments prior to even reaching the streets.
Excellent. Thank you for that answer. Joan.
So I'm going to talk about mental health. It's in my title. You're going to figure that out. I guess what I want to say about COVID, particularly around mental health, is that the press has been reporting that we're in a mental health crisis as though COVID caused that. And it did not cause it. It exacerbated it. It has been a crisis for a really long time. And I think for us, the real big move for us, so we're an 85-year-old company. I feel like we're all saying it now. But our foundation is actually 60-plus years old. And we were always focused on children's health. And before COVID, we started looking at mental health and saying, wait, mental health is health. And we missed the ball, and it's actually killing our kids. And we'll get into this a little bit, but it is the second leading cause of death in young people 10 and above, because suicide is actually that bad. So I can give you statistics that'll make you cry. I just want to say this in the sense that you cannot talk about the well-being of young people and skip it. And when it comes to COVID, and I'll talk about this, it's really horrible. But what I'm really worried about is that everyone's so excited to turn the corner on COVID that they're going to turn the corner on what we figured out during COVID. So I'll talk about that a little bit.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Trey, I hope you're not too nervous to be on stage. Let's hear from
I
your
hope you're not too
perspective.
tired of seeing me on stage. No, thanks for having me, and thrilled to be sitting here with the colleagues. I love this question. As I said before, I came to GCI Health 4 years ago. My background is in public health and development. I joined from the multilateral and UN system. I was working with the WHO for a number of years, and most recently was a health advisor in the UN Secretary General's office. So I am used to looking at public health through the lens of low and middle income countries. And while I love this question for a number of reasons, one is that suddenly people around me started to understand what public health was. It became very real, right? Suddenly what I did with my life and what my career was, my parents actually understood. So that was exciting. But I think it also, for me personally, what it shifted was while looking at public health through the lens of low and middle income countries, right, starts to really perpetuate a lens that's somewhat divisive, right? Public health is a divider. And I think for me, COVID-19 reminded me that actually public health was a great equalizer, right? COVID-19 was a great equalizer in that we saw systems around the world, even those most resourced, buckle, right? And as a result, we saw societies start to kind of come to their knees. We saw businesses all but halt, right? And suddenly it was a great equalizer rather than a divider.
Excellent. And I love that we have all these perspectives, whether it's healthcare or mental health or public health. We have a lot of perspectives on this stage. Trey, I'm going to come right back to you. Companies often think that they are asking the community for their input rather than kind of the way it should be the other way around.
Yeah.
I wonder from your perspective, what does that sort of simple in language but sometimes profound shift enable for companies and for public health?
Really profound. And we talk about this a lot in the public health space, right? We talk a lot about it in the kind of corporate impact space and how we're working with communities and make space for communities at the table, right? And I push back on that because I think where the true power lies is, shouldn't we rather be asking for a seat at the community's table, right? And really I think that's how we learn, right? That's how we foster really meaningful, authentic partnerships so that we can learn from and with communities. We know, listen, we are facing a convergence of public health crises, and let's be very clear, they are all public health crises. And I think at the end of the day, and I'm so thrilled that so many have been talking about this today, our responses have to be community-led, right? And so thinking about, I'm struck by the conversation with land betterment and the partnership with Native Americans. I think such really tremendous examples of how companies, business is working with communities, right, to really invest in, right, and bring to bear solutions that are resonant to communities, right, and owned by communities. That's what's, I think, really powerful.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think we've heard countless examples of exactly that. And even just a couple of sessions ago about building a park and how starting from the idea to build a park was not, let's say, successful at first, but then coming back and engaging with the community is what allowed that to be successful on the second try. So now we'll go to Carmen. Obviously, Merck is a health company. It's very central, as you alluded to in your opening, to everything, including the bottom line of the company. But I wonder, how has health allowed, how is it key to your ESG journey as well?
Sure. Before I answer that question, though, I just want to say yay, Trey, for bringing up the public health issues. I've known Trey for a while now, and we come from similar worlds.
Yeah.
And I think that even though public health has always been an issue, if we think about things like cholera, if we think about, things like polio, in our history, we've had to deal with a lot of these kinds of diseases or outbreaks. I don't think until just these last few years, people really realized that that was public health, right? That's what we needed to do to engage our communities and our partnerships and our collaborators, as someone previously said, to try to solve these harder to solve problems. So thank you for that. In terms of Merck's ESG profile, we really have 4 signature priority areas. Environmental, obviously, our employees, ethics and transparency, and then access to health. And we come to those priority areas by doing an ESG materiality assessment. But obviously, because we are a healthcare company, it is one of the most important things we do. And it is essential. And I think also what we've learned is that expanding the healthcare ecosystem in a sustainable way, and I say that because most of the people in this room are in it for the long haul. I don't personally manage a P&L, and I know, that really drives a lot of what our companies do. But the change that we're trying to make in the healthcare ecosystem is really a long-term change. How can we ensure cold chain? How can we make sure that delivery of our innovations is available in countries throughout the world? And what does that mean for the healthcare worker on the ground? And how can we help them become well-versed in those specialty skills? Or is it worth it for them? What are the alternatives that we might want to support in different communities to ensure that they're getting the best access to care? And we've been doing this for a long time. Some of you may be familiar with our commitment to eliminate river blindness, where we work with folks like at the Carter Center and the Global Task Force on Health, a nonprofit, and really have been, this is the 35th anniversary of the Mectizan donation program. And we have been working on this and will continue to work on this until we eliminate river blindness. But my point is that taking forward those kinds of programs and thinking about how we can innovate for the modern age and build that long-term system is really what we're trying to do. And we continue to be committed to that mission in many different ways, which I won't talk about all right now, so everybody else can have a word.
Thank you very much. We'll have definitely more time to expand. So, Joan, to you, we're all just beginning to see all the ways in which, COVID has affected young people in particular, but really all of us. I'm wondering, again, drawing on the ecosystem idea here, what have they lost over the past 2.5 years, and how has that impacted employees and their families, as well as, how can companies, how have you built this ecosystem of success for them?
So let me start with the bad news, and I'll try to make my way back to ecosystem. And I just, I'm sure you're all sort of aware of these things, but I just want to put it all kind of in one 3-point thing. I'm really concentrating on teens here. There's different stories for younger kids, but let's start with 250,000 kids lost their primary caregiver or parent. That is about the worst adverse childhood experience that a kid can have, and I don't want to diminish that. Let's just put it up there because that's part of COVID, and that's just U.S. statistics, that's not global. But particularly for teens, I want to talk about what a normal teenage year is supposed to be like. You're supposed to be socializing with people and building your own friendships and discovering yourself through those friendships. You're supposed to be separating from your parents and having independence. Now go back to COVID, those same kids were separated from everyone but their parents, who they pretty much hated. And they're locked into just social engagement with either unhealthy tools, like some social media tools, or gaming or other things that can also have negative effects, but they weren't able to hang out with their friends. So all of that self-exploration got delayed and got affected. And then they also lost all these rituals and rites of passage that happen that, you might think not getting your prom or not walking in graduation isn't that big a deal, but it really is a big deal when you're 16, 17, and those are huge rites of passage for you. So I just want to point that out because that's what they lost. And the trigger effects that can have is to create anxiety, to create depression, to make it difficult for them. There's other kids who were great at home, then they had to go back to school and they have social anxieties about being there. So this has been a really hard time, and you have to remember they don't have our coping skills, and we barely made it through. So that's really what was happening. The sort of good news is that prior to COVID, people were ignoring what was happening with their kids. So 1 in 5 kids was having a mental health disorder, but yet 2/3 of them showing symptoms never got care. That was the reality of what was happening. We can talk about the access issue, which is huge. But that was before COVID made a lot of parents who were being told that there was something going on with their kids suddenly super aware that that thing was actually happening. So your teacher says, little Bobby's, really struggling in the classroom, and as a parent, you're like, nah, he's fine. And then all of a sudden, you're with him all day long, and you're like, he's not fine. So the good news is it prompted a lot of parents to try to get care for their kids. This is great news. The not so great news is the ecosystem that this exists in has no resources. So I want to talk a little bit about just how we respond. I'm just going to give one analogy that someone gave me. They were talking about healthcare, and they said, it's like, here's the pill that's going to cure the thing, only they don't realize some people don't have a glass and they don't have water. And in the mental health space, there's no water, no glass, and no pill. That's the reality. So when we looked at this as an issue, we decided to tackle it from 2 fronts. One was to plunk down a lot of money. It was a $20 million initial investment. I'm not sure everyone can get there, and I'm not asking you to. But for us, it was all about driving actual things to scale as much as we could. But I think more importantly, Morgan Stanley decided to put our brand, our voice, and our networks into play. And that is something we don't traditionally do, and that's the whole point. You don't look at us as like the cool, edgy, whatever. My marketing people will kill me. But that's not who you think we are. So the fact that we were talking about mental health to us was a really big stigma thing, like if even we're talking about it. But we also knew we couldn't go live with any of this if we weren't doing right by our own people. So before we put one penny out in the community, we also built up all of our internal systems. Hopefully you all have anyway, just because of COVID, but please make sure that your programs not only take care of employees, but take care of their children. And we do a lot to educate employees about how to do that best and to have resources. It's the airplane. You got to put your oxygen on yourself before you can take care of others. So we think of it as this one giant consistent package, internal and external. And external, your voice is really, really valuable, particularly around stigma, because if everybody acted like it was no big deal, it wouldn't be a big deal anymore.
Thank you so much.
It's a big deal.
It is a big deal. So actually, because I heard a little bit that I think alludes to my next question, I'm going to go right back to you.
Okay.
So health equity and access
Yeah.
is incredibly important. It's now at the fore. We all understand across many ESG issues that access is important, equity is important. So what challenges must we all rise to in addressing this to make sure that everyone has access?
Let me just specifically go to a mental health thing, but I think it's going to overlap probably. We all know that there's an access issue on an economic scale of people who are uninsured, have transportation issues, just the cost of things. But I really want to make sure we're also clear on the sort of health desert issue, particularly around mental health. There are literally not enough care providers for the number of kids who need the services. There are not enough care advisors who are pediatrically trained, and there are absolutely not enough who reflect the communities that are struggling the most. So when I go back to my analogy of water and the pill and the glass, like it is really an issue. Treat yourself. Go to watch the John Oliver 10 minutes that he did on, last week on mental health. He explains it actually in 10 minutes beautifully. But the entire system is undersupported, underfunded. Everything about it needs to be fixed, and it is overwhelmed. Even the wealthiest are not getting their kids into beds. Like we just need to be honest about that. That's what's happening here. And when I plead to everybody to think about where they can include this in their platforms, that's part of it, because it's not a question of I can get it and you can't. No one can get it.
Can I just add on to a very meaningful points that you're making, which is, I mentioned earlier the long term. We have to take the long view in building some of these systems and resilience and so forth. If we think about the history of mental health and look back into the 80s when governments, both federal and state, started closing down mental health care facilities, that really was the start of some of what we're seeing now in terms of people not getting access to the kind of care that they need. Because those beds aren't available, we see folks incarcerated, mostly because of whatever they did as a root cause of mental health. We see kids doing lots of things they shouldn't be doing because of that, and they can't get treatment or care. And we're seeing right here in New York City, but in every major city across the country, more and more people who are homeless because of mental health issues and challenges. So I just wanted to highlight that point. What we're trying to fix has really been in the works for a long time, and it's going to take us a long time to get back to where we need to be.
I would only add the financing of this particular healthcare model is really complicated and unfortunate because even when there is insurance, the reimbursement rates and stuff don't meet the need.
Thank you so much. Trey, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot to add, but I will. I'm so glad that we're talking about ecosystems, right? I think when we talk about equity and access, right, we're talking about really big, long-term, systemic challenges, right? At the risk of sounding provocative, in many ways, our system is not broken. It is operating as it was intended, right? And so I think it's our job to break that system and make it work for everyone, right? And that takes all of us, right? That takes businesses, that takes public, that takes providers, et cetera, et cetera. But we have to take a step back, and this is one thing that we really try to do in our work with our clients is and partners is to look beyond health for those solutions, right? And that means sometimes we have to look beyond what is material to our business and look at what is material to a community, right? And again, we sit in many communities ourselves, right? And so I think it really is a chance and an opportunity to reflect on the variety of determinants, right? Yes, we're talking about social determinants. We're talking about political determinants, economic determinants, educational determinants, commercial determinants of health. And so we have to take that systems approach, right? And we have to step back and think about, I always think like, yes, we work in healthcare communications and public affairs, right? And so many of our clients are bringing products to market, right? And life-saving products and products that have significant public health impact. But I always try to take a step back and think, well, what led that individual to require this product, this therapy, this diagnostic, whatever it might be, right? And if we look across that journey or that odyssey, right, expedition, whatever it might be, I think that's what, where the magic really lies. We have to take that holistic view.
Excellent. Well, I just want to thank all of my panelists up here as well as everyone in the crowd. I did promise you that this would be an insightful conversation. I think we delivered. So thank you so much. Great.